There are 5 things people commonly do that they end up regretting at the end of their retirement. In today's video, I'm going to walk you through what those 5 things are so that you can avoid them and live the most meaningful, purposeful retirement possible. Now, this isn't something that's specific to retirement. This is one of those life principles. Stephen Covey, in his highly popular book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he tells us to begin with the end in mind. Because when we begin with the end in mind, when we see where we want to go, it starts to inform the things that we should do today to ensure we're getting there in the most efficient, effective way possible. So what's the goal of retirement? Well, ideally, it's not just an okay retirement. It's not just a retirement where you don't run out of money. In an ideal world, it's a retirement that's filled with adventure and fun and purpose and meaning. And one of the ways that we can ensure our retirement is full of purpose and meaning is to avoid the things that we're going to look back on one day and end up regretting. So let's take a look and let's understand when people are at the end of their retirements, or in other words, when they're at the end of their lives, what are the common things they look back on in regret, saying, I wish I had done that differently? Because when we understand what that looks like from the perspective of someone who's been there, we can take the steps appropriate today to avoid that and live that life of meaning and purpose. Bronnie Ware is an Australian nurse, and she spent years with people who were dying. And what she noticed in years and years of doing this is that when people were within a couple months or a few months of their passing, there was common regrets that surfaced over and over and over again. And so what she started to realize is these regrets weren't specific. They weren't unique to this person or that person or that person. They were common regrets that many people had. And what she did is she wrote a book outlining those regrets so that the rest of us could learn from that and take the steps to avoid them. So before you start thinking, James, this has nothing to do with retirement, let me be the first to say this has everything to do with retirement. Retirement is all about living purposefully and intentionally, and in order to do so, we need to understand how do we live better lives? How do we live more full lives? And understanding this is going to be the first step to helping us get there. So let's start to understand these 5 common regrets so that we can start to avoid them as we move forward. So regret number 1, as Bronnie Ware was writing this book, the first regret that she talked about is she said, people would tell her, I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected me. I'm going to read from the book here. She said, when people realize that their life is almost over and look back clearly on it, it is easy to see how many dreams have gone unfulfilled. Most people had not honored even half of their dreams and had to die knowing that it was due to choices they had made or not made. So as you look at your life, are you doing the things that you want to be doing? Are you doing things intentionally? Or are we doing things because they're expected of us? Are we doing things because we've always done them this way and we've set our own dreams, our own intentions aside because of what we've expected, others have expected, society's expected, and we didn't live a life true to ourselves? A simple question we can ask ourselves is, why do we do what we do? Why do we drive what we drive? Why do we live in the home that we live in? Why do we fill our time with the things we spend our time doing? Hopefully, in many cases, it's because that's what we want to be doing. That's what we've chosen to do. But if we're honest with ourselves, myself included, sometimes we think about that and realize that the things we're doing, the choices we're making, are somewhat influenced by ourselves, but in many ways, they're influenced by others. Nothing necessarily wrong with this, except that if we allow others to dictate all of our decisions, consciously or subconsciously, we're going to start making decisions to do something that works for someone else. We're going to make decisions based on what other people want. And as Bronnie Ware so poignantly stated, we're going to look back on our lives one day and say, I wish we had the courage to make decisions based on what was best for me, based upon what I wanted. And this isn't a selfish thing. This isn't to say life is all about you and you shouldn't care about others. But as we're looking at what we want to do, especially as you're dreaming about your retirement, what do you want that to look like? What do you want to do? What's going to allow you to look back one day and say, that was an incredible season of life, and I did it without regrets, or at least with minimizing regrets? One way we can do so, or the first way we can do so, is to be sure we're living true to ourselves and not the expectations that others have of us. Going back to Bronnie's book, she says the second thing that people regret when they look back on their lives is they wish they hadn't worked so hard. And by so hard, it wasn't necessarily how hard they worked, but the time that they spent working. Go to the book here. She said, all the men I nursed deeply regretted spending so much of their lives on the treadmill of a work existence. How many people do you know that could be said of them? Maybe it could be said of you. How much time do we spend at work? How much time do we say, yes, I just need to get through this one more project, meet this one more deadline, get that one more promotion? And before we know it, we've spent 30, 40, 50 years doing that same thing over and over and over, which by itself, nothing wrong with it, until you look at what was the opportunity cost? What family events did we miss? What health things could we have done that we had to forego? What things that were important to you did you say no to so that you could stay on this treadmill of work and completing projects and deadlines and furthering your career? So working hard is a great thing. Working hard for your family is a wonderful thing. But at what point does that become too much? And asking yourself, in this moment, the decisions I'm making, am I going to look back in the future and regret how much time I'm spending doing this thing? Or am I going to look back on this and say, you know what, that was a sacrifice that had to be made so that I could free up this time for family, free up this time to do the things that I wanted to do? James Clear, who's the author of Atomic Habits, he encourages people to ask this question. And that question is simple. It's, what are you optimizing for? Are you optimizing for work just for work's sake? Or are you optimizing for something else? And this can be very difficult because, again, it's easy to fall into that trap of saying, look, working hard is a good thing. Working long hours is necessary many times. But what's that right balance between doing what's necessary and doing what's going to lead to a better, more fulfilling life versus doing something that's going to cost you dearly when it comes to that profound regret that you might experience in your final days, looking back saying, I wish I hadn't worked so hard because of all those wonderful things I missed along the way. The third thing that Bronnie talks about in her book is she said that people will say, I wish I had the courage to express my feelings. Going back to the book, she says many people suppress their feelings in order to keep peace with others. As a result, they settled for mediocre existences and never became who they were truly capable of becoming. Many developed illnesses related to the bitterness and resentment they carried as a result. So as we look at that, where do you see that in your own life? Where do you see an unwillingness to express how you truly feel? And again, this can be a difficult thing. If we told everyone how we truly felt, we might not have a whole lot of friends. But if you could be open with how you're feeling, if you can be open in an honest and truthful way, that's something that allows us to avoid that feeling of resentment. It allows us to avoid those actual physical ailments that Bronnie talks about when people hold on to things, when they suppress these things and let it eat at them internally. So it's a completely exhausting way to live. And even more than that, as Bronnie talks about, it's one of the greatest regrets that people have when they're looking back on their life in their final days. Number 4, the fourth regret that Bronnie talks about is she says people will tell her they wish they had stayed in touch with their friends. Going to the book. Often they would not truly realize the full benefits of old friends until their dying weeks, and it was not always possible to track them down. Many had become so caught up in their own lives that they had let golden friendships slip over by the years. Now, we all know the importance of friendship. We all know the importance of community, but it's also very easy to get distracted and caught up with the day-to-day things that you have to do over the course of your lifetime. And here's the things about friendships. They don't slip by after a day, after a week, after a month of no contact. They're those things that aren't urgent. They're not right in front of you saying, hey, this is a burning priority. But if we're not careful, if we're not intentional, a week goes by, a month goes by, a year goes by, a lifetime goes by, and we look back on our dying days saying, I really wish I'd stayed in touch with those friends. It's in those moments when that clarity is there, looking back on your life. If those moments people are saying, I wish I had kept in touch, what that tells me is that something that today, again, beginning with the end in mind. If the end in mind is saying, I don't want those regrets, what can we do today to prioritize that? What can we do today to stay in touch with friends, to stay in touch with those people that we once were close with, but maybe those relationships have started to drift away? And then number 5, the fifth regret that Bronnie talks about is people will say, I wish I had let myself be happier. Go into the book. Many did not realize this until the end, that happiness is a choice. They had stayed stuck in old patterns and old habits. So ask yourself, how did you get to where you are today? Whether where you are is a good spot or a bad spot. I think if you look back on it, and if you're honest with yourself, it's going to be based on the choices that you made. Not the choices of the things that happened to you externally, but how did you react to those things? How did you interpret those things? Was this something that was working against you or something that was working for you? Once you start to realize that every single thing that happens, yes, some of those things are out of our control, but at the end of the day, our reaction to those things, the way we interpret those things, that's fully within our control. So those that were happy, as Bronnie saw, they made the choice to be happy. It's not to say they had easy lives. They definitely didn't have perfect lives, but in the midst of the things that were happening to them, they made the choice to be happy. So as you're thinking about this and going into your retirement, there's going to be all kinds of things that catch you by surprise. There's going to be all kinds of things that maybe you didn't expect to happen the way they actually turn out. What's our response going to be? Are we going to have that growth mindset of saying, I'm going to learn from this. I'm going to get better from this. I'm going to be happy in spite or despite of this. If we do so, we're going to be able to look back one day and say, I gave myself permission to be happy. I didn't get stuck in this feeling of not letting myself have permission to be happy, of not giving myself the ability to do so. So how can you start doing things? How can you start making choices that allow you to be happy? Sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes it's fighting against the identity that we've built up against ourselves, up of ourselves, I should say. But the choice to do so, the practice to do so, is going to lead to a much more fulfilling retirement and a much more fulfilling life. So again, in closing, what on earth does this have to do with retirement? It has everything to do with retirement. Because retirement's not a money thing. Money is just the thing that allows us to retire, that supports the lifestyle we want to live. Retirement is about the season of life where you have freedom. You have freedom to pursue what you want. You have freedom to do what you want, to be with who you want. And one way that we can make the most of the season is understanding what people commonly regret at the end of it, so that today, with where we are now, we can make choices to avoid that regret and have the most fulfilling retirement possible. So seeking to avoid regret is one of the best things that we can do to have a more fulfilling retirement. Now, on top of the regrets people face at the end of retirement, there's also some regrets they have at the beginning, or things they wish they had known going into retirement. That's why I made this video right here. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the 5 things people wish they had known before they retired so they could best prepare and make that transition to retirement smoother. Once again, I'm James Knoll, founder of Root Financial, and if you're interested in seeing how we help our clients at Root Financial get the most out of life with their money, be sure to visit us at www.rootfinancialpartners.com.